Okay, so in part two, we spoke about how to separate currency into three separate values. So let's talk about each of these values and how extrapolating it to infinity will work in time and in society and in efficiency. So the first one is work. So if products cost work, so you'll get products that are automated and end up being cheaper, right? In the work value at least, right? So it'll cost less work to produce the product, so therefore it'll cost less work to buy the product. Um, and that means you'll end up needing to work less in order to sustain yourself. So in the ultimate future, everything will cost very little work. It'll all be completely automated. And that means you would need to work a lot less in order to purchase these items. Um, also, companies would compete for making products more efficient. That would be the competition. Now, obviously, you'll still have those handcrafted products that will cost a lot more work to produce, and if you wanted to buy them, you need to spend a lot more work. Um, so that's the extrapolation of work. The extrapolation of resources is products that cost resources will you want to make them more efficient. You want to make them cost less resources, um, and and not only that, you want to be able to recycle the resources to get your resources back, right? You want to recycle something, it'll take a little bit of land, a little bit of work, and then you'll get your resources back. So in the ultimate future, everything will be ultimately recyclable and or fixable, and you won't lose any resources. Now, the other thing is resources. You have to think about how much will a resource cost based on other resources. You're going to have some kind of ground resource. So ultimately, it'll be some kind of supply and demand factor where a kilogram of water will be judged against a kilogram of something else or whatever weight measure you want to use, grams. Um, so you can go back to the gold standard for resources, for example. So everything will be traded against a gram of gold, whatever gold is worth currently on the market, right? And so the supply and demand will change based on this. Um, Earning resources at the moment, you can spend work and land to dig gold or dig iron or create resources. Eventually, obviously, there's asteroid farming and things like this where you would also spend work and resources and and I guess not land in outer space, but at least to launch the rocket and to develop the tools to farm the asteroids. You would need to spend some land time, and then you can get resources from outer space or whatever. So there's that aspect. Um, then ultimately with land, things will become more and more efficient with land use, right? You'll end up It'll also ultimately control population. So if you tie land to inheritance, then if you have two children, each child will get a share of their parents' land. If you have 10 children, right, each child will get a share and they'll have less land to deal with. So it's ultimately a population control as well, because you don't want to have too many children where they can no longer survive on the land. They can no longer inherit the land properly. So it's sort of like an automatic population control. So, for example, in a small country with a high population, everyone will get a lot less land. In a country with that can afford to divide the land up a lot larger, maybe like Canada, for example, with a lower population in a large land area, they would have a large piece of land each person, and they can grow and develop based on that. Um, the other thing is land use will become more and more efficient, right? Because you don't want to pay land. Eventually, things will cost less and less land, and so in the ultimate eventual future, nothing will cost any more land, right? Or you'll be able to use very little piece of your land in order to create that thing. So obviously, if you ever need to rent out land, you need to rent it out for long periods of time. So like say 50 years, and so during this 50-year contract, you could get paid once a year for your land time. So you'll get, if you give out a square meter of land for 50 years, every year you'll get a square meter year of land time, and you can divide that up into minutes and seconds and trade land time for any product. So that's just a quick, just looking at the time here. It's a quick understanding of how it'll develop in the future. Also, supply and demand can come in for work. So if it, like say there aren't a lot of doctors and society needs a lot of doctors, right? This is a basic supply and demand formula, just demand over supply. Like you need a certain number of doctors, and you only have a certain number. You only have a small number, so obviously the value of each worker will go up. So you might have to end up spending 2 hours work for every hour of doctor because there aren't enough doctors. So the price of a doctor will go up, and people will tend to go to become doctors because there's a high demand of that, and they'll get paid more. They'll get more of a demand. So if you want to base an economy based on that, or if you want to assign people to their jobs so that every job is filled, that's also an option, right? I'm just laying out the basic groundwork for the currency system and how you want to solve the problems. That's up to each society individually. But you can have a supply demand premium on work. You can have a supply demand premium on resources. You're going to have to, right? Like 1 gram of gold isn't going to be worth the same as 1 gram of water. You can't trade water gram for gram with gold. You're going to have some kind of premium exchange rate between resources. And then also for land, I don't know if you want to have a premium rate for land or not, based on location or whatever. That's up to you to solve. Now, the last thing that I mentioned in the last video is premium limited artifacts, like ancient artifacts that should be stored in museums, things that are priceless, or first editions of things that end up being worth more because there's just not a lot of them, and there's a high demand for them, right? So in our current economy, that's how it works. So what you could do is you could say, okay, well, it's the resource that's worth a lot. It's not the work. You're not going to pay a lot of work to get that. You're not going to pay a lot of land to get that. You're going to pay resource. I don't know how that's going to work. That's something that sort of needs to be solved on that level. I personally would never purchase something that's has sentimental value, because there's no need for it. Like, who needs an Action Comics #1? You could just have a digital version and put that one in a museum or something. I don't know. I don't know what the solution for that would be. That's still up in the air. But that's the last part of the tangled web of our economy that needs to be solved. So that's the basic idea of what our economy is. Obviously, there's a lot of problems, a lot of solutions that need to be solved, a lot of institutions. Like, how are you going to say, well, okay, you're working, how are you going to clock people's hours? What about taxes? How are you going to get government jobs or teachers' jobs? Who's going to pay for that work? Who's going to spend work to make that work? And things like that. Also, retirement, right? How much work do you need to save in order to retire? But having these ultimately these three currencies based on real life things with real physical units ties them to reality a little more. It leaves them less up in the air. Less people are able to ride the fluctuations, and people will be able to put their work in where it's needed rather than where it's most profitable for them. Okay, so that's just a basic idea of how we can start thinking about fixing our economy.